Days Gone 2 was a cancelled action-adventure video game that was being developed by Bend Studio and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. The last entry in the series was released in 2019, and the launch started slow, but the game built up a strong following as time went on. As the years passed, details were released and fans learned that Days Gone 2 was cancelled. Let's break down Bend Studio's original pitch, why Sony did not pick up the game, and more. As always, all the sources will be linked in the description below, so make sure to check those out and support those original writers. And with that out of the way, let's get into why Days Gone 2 was cancelled. The first collection of stories about the pitch were revealed in April of 2021, when notable gaming journalist Jason Schreier released an article discussing Sony and choices they made with their game studios. In 2 paragraphs, Schreier discussed the future of Days Gone and said, quote, "This fixation on teams that churn out hits is creating unrest across Sony's portfolio of game studios. Oregon-based Sony Bend, best known for the 2019 open-world action game Days Gone, tried unsuccessfully to pitch a sequel that year, according to people familiar with the proposal. Although the first game had been profitable, its development had been lengthy and critical reception was mixed, so a Days Gone 2 wasn't seen as a viable option." He continues on and mentions the studio was morphed as a support studio to help with Naughty Dog projects, but the staff was unhappy and now they are working on a new game that will be part of a new franchise. This article provides a lot of details and insight that was not public, and this article opened the floodgates with other publications and former developers at Bend Studio to talk more openly about Days Gone 2. Following the Bloomberg article, the God of War creator did a 4-hour live stream with the former Sony Bend game director. The live stream was 4 hours, but the Video Games Chronicle covered the entire live stream and consolidated it down to a few paragraphs about Days Gone 2. Jeff, the former game director, did confirm that the team had pitched Days Gone 2, but could not confirm or deny if the project was cancelled due to an NDA. He continues on and says the sales of the game were partially to blame and Sony had lost faith in the franchise, along with the fact that as development continued on, the original budget had increased. He states the original budget that they agreed on with Sony was significant, and when they needed even more, that was another problem for Sony. He closes out by saying the sequel would have included a significant online mode and describes it as a shared co-op universe. He says the team wanted to include co-op in the original, but they ran out of time. One more aspect of the cancellation was due to Sean Layden, the former chairman and CEO of PlayStation Studios, retiring. He was noted as being a big supporter of the original Days Gone, and the team noted he would be key in a sequel happening. So when he left the company, chances decreased drastically. And Jeff described the pitch as not going well after that, and said, quote, "It was very obvious that we shouldn't be talking about Days Gone while we were working on the pitch and generating it. It was clear that it was a non-starter, and there was nothing in the pitch that made the local manager and his boss feel good about it. That's probably a failure of the creative group, but it was just an uphill battle the whole time. And everything with this project sounds like it was never meant to happen, and the timing especially was not in the team's favor." The next collection of stories I want to cover are about the sales figure that has been reported around Days Gone. The story started when Sony announced that Ghost of Tsushima had sold over 8 million copies as of January of 2022. Jeff, the former game director, quoted the tweet and said, quote, "At the time I left Sony, Days Gone had been out for a year and a half and a month and sold over 8 million copies. It's since gone on to sell more and then 1 million plus on Steam. Local studio management always made us feel like it was a big disappointment." And if this number is accurate, it would be crazy that Sony didn't move forward with a sequel, even if the reviews were mixed. But the numbers were disputed when Jeff said the numbers were from GameStat, which track trophy data and aren't necessarily the most accurate figures. I don't want to get into it any more than that, but the numbers have been disputed and this number is most likely inflated to some extent, so do whatever you want with this information. And if we continue on, surprisingly enough, a lot of details were released in an interview with USA Today in January of 2022. Jeff Ross decided to discuss the game in even more depth. Jeff starts by saying that if they would have been able to create a sequel, they would have included so many new ideas, which is due to the team already having the foundation set, and they wouldn't need to hash out the generic gameplay mechanics. He says the progress among sequels would have been the same as the difference between the first and second Uncharted or Arkham Batman games. Moving on, he says the sequel still would have followed Deacon St. John's story and would continue the relationship with Sarah. They wanted to add more depth to the relationship, and Bend also wanted to expand the narrative in many different ways. Jeff also says the ecology of the world would have been enhanced as well, and the ideas were to allow bears to dig through trash cans, wolves to roam and hunt more dynamically, and generally give every enemy and ally more varied behavior. The biggest change was saved for last. Jeff acknowledges that swimming was the worst in Days Gone and would have changed. He says that 75% of player death was caused from drowning in game, and during the original development they tried to fix the swimming beforehand, but couldn't fully flesh out the idea. They would need the animations, sound effects, and all other components which they didn't have time to complete. But obviously this game never progressed past the pitch phase, and it's easy to talk about changes in hindsight and in a perfect world, so who knows how many of these changes would have actually been implemented and how different this game actually would have been, because it was just never created. And the reason the game was cancelled was relatively simple. Days Gone had to be a massive success, not only in terms of the sales, but reviews. The game cost Sony a lot of money and did not pay off in the way the studio wanted. Then the executive that was pushing the IP from the start retired, and the project lost a lot of steam. Obviously, the studio could also return to the Days Gone universe at some point, but I don't see that as being too likely. For now, we should look forward to their next game, and the team taking everything they learned from their last major launch and development for another project, which should be interesting. Either way, that's where I'm going to end this video, and that is why Days Gone 2 was cancelled. Make sure to like and share this video, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.